Hi, I'm Caroline, and I've created a lot of things, but mostly I've created a life I love. Join me on my journey as a podcaster, business owner, and mom as I try to create all the things. Welcome to the Caroline Creates podcast. Hey everybody, Caroline here. We are back from a little break. My husband had surgery a couple of weeks ago, and I decided, you know what? I just need to put some things on hold so I can focus on my family. He's doing great. It went so well. No problems. Easy recovery. He's back at work. I'm so thrilled and happy to be back. And yeah, so I'm actually going to be wrapping up the podcast for the rest of the year pretty soon. And I wanted to talk today about my reasoning behind that and why I'm switching to seasons. So as you know, if you've been following me along, this is not my only podcast. My main podcast is called The Creative Biz Rebellion. That's where I put a lot of my podcasting energy. And this podcast is to serve as a way for me to share about my podcasting journey and my podcasting editing business. But I definitely am finding that, it's hard to keep up with so many things, right? So many podcasts. Also, I kind of feel like there is definitely a point where I might not necessarily run out of things to say, but need a break coming up with things to say. I've talked about this a lot, but creating content week after week after week can be really exhausting. And I mean, there are just some weeks where I'm just like, nope, I don't got anything. And there are some weeks where I'm like, yeah, I've got like 5 things. And I definitely have tried to batch record and practice what I preach and be ahead of the game, get episodes ready to go early. But just with life the last few months, I've found that that's been really, really, really difficult. And I've never really been one for seasons. I think they work really great for other people. For our podcast, Creative Biz Rebellion, we've never used seasons because we really feel like we want to be available to our listeners all the time, which maybe that's a little ridiculous, but we love it. And so instead of doing seasons, we actually will just take breaks as needed, or we will re-air old episodes as reruns or like a special from the archives type episode. So that's how kind of we've worked around seasons. But I started thinking about this podcast and how it could best serve my business. And since a lot of the people that I work with are business owners who have podcasts, I thought I would kind of share some of the reasoning behind me switching from just an episodic, all the time podcast to a podcast that runs in seasons. So there are kind of a few ways you can do seasons. I've seen them done a few different ways. One way is you have seasons which kind of delineate a theme of your podcast. And so you'll do like a certain number of episodes will be a season and they will be around a theme. And you may or may not take a break between seasons, but you do say, okay, this set of episodes is a season, this set of episodes is a season. And then there are seasons that are done for the sake of scheduling. So you will only have podcasts during a certain time of year, and then you will take a break and start a new season later. And that's what I'm going to be doing with this podcast. I'm going to be taking a break after October until probably the beginning of next year, probably January or February. Not 100% sure, still planning out my year. But one of the reasons I'm doing that is I want to take a break around the holidays. I homeschool my kiddos, and we generally try to take the month of December off and just focus on celebrating the holidays and doing special activities that have to do with that. But also, I'm going to be kind of taking a break from what I would call selling marketing things, right? So I am not going to be like releasing any new products or selling any new content, anything like that during those months. I am about to release a new course called the Mini Podcast Launch Guide. And I want this podcast, obviously, to help people to know about that, to help people know about my services. And so it is important for me to run it right now. So that's an interesting way that you can use a podcast for your business, right? I've talked about before on this podcast and then just in life in general and conversations I have with my clients and other people, podcasting isn't necessarily a money-making business. It definitely can be, but as a business owner with a podcast, I'm not necessarily making money off of my podcast. Not yet anyways, right? It can take a while to get to that point. So the purpose of my podcast is to be a funnel. And I'm just keeping it real. I mean, I think it's kind of funny to tell people your marketing tactics and how you're funneling them. But for me, this podcast is a way for me to share my passion for podcasting, how much I love it, but to also share what's going on in my business. And so I can actually schedule and structure my seasons around the seasons of my business where I am selling, right? So when I started this podcast, I started it knowing that I was going to be creating courses, working on getting some passive income going for my business. And I wanted this podcast to be a way to share my knowledge, to share, what I know about podcasting, to kind of establish myself, right, as an expert, because that's what we're trying to do as business owners. We're trying to say, okay, here I am. I know all of these things. Come buy my course, right? And so I knew that that's what I wanted this to be. Honestly, when I jumped into this podcast and I said, I'm going to have my own podcast about podcasting, I didn't really think through the schedule. I just knew I wanted to do it. And I think it's really important when you start out to just jump in and leap and go for it. And that's exactly what I did. I just started recording and I put these out into the world. And I quickly realized that, I don't know how well these are going to serve me during my off months, right? This is a lot of effort, right? To record, to edit, to create the graphics, to upload it to the blog, to send out the newsletter. It's a lot of effort to do a podcast. You guys know that. Everyone who podcasts know it's time consuming. And do I need to do that on those off months? I am in a situation where I have clients consistently. And then I also have like some special kind of monthly clients that I help launch their podcast and things like that. And so for those months where I'm not going to be actively selling, I'm not even going to be actively wanting to add new clients because we're going to be going into the holiday season and wanting to take a break, I really don't need to be as visible as I am. And so having this podcast go into seasons is going to be really great for that. The other thing I love about having a podcast is in seasons is that this is going to give me the time to plan. So the months that I am not recording this podcast, I am actually going to take the time to plan all of my podcast episodes for next season, which I'm really excited about. And I want to dive more into tech, and I want to dive more into kind of the why and the how, and maybe talk about more of how to make a career out of podcasting. That's going to be really exciting, right? See, I'm already getting excited. But right now, those topics don't serve me. They don't serve what I'm eating for my business. So to go into seasons is really not that difficult. And actually, iTunes has made it easier for us to have our podcast be in seasons. iTunes last year, when they overhauled kind of the tags for podcasts, which the tags are the things that are in the feed that I talked about before, they added a season tag, right? And so when you are uploading your episodes to your server host, which I love Libsyn, you can actually say what season the podcast is and then what episode number. And you can really number those many different ways. You can either do like season 1, episode 1 through 20, and then start over season 2, episode 1 through 20. Or I've even seen people do season 1, season 2, season 3, season 4, but the episodes just keep going 1 through 100, whatever. So I am still a little bit undecided about how I'm going to do that. I do think I'm kind of leaning more towards the season 1, episodes 1 through whatever, season 2, episodes 1 through whatever. I really think that's what I'm going to do. The other thing I want to really encourage you is to not to feel like, okay, well, between seasons when my podcast isn't doing anything, I'm going to lose all of my listeners. And there are some ways you can kind of go around that. And one of them is to keep on teasing your next season. So obviously you should have social media, newsletter, however you're connecting with your listeners outside of the podcast. And if you're not connecting with your listeners outside the podcast, I highly recommend you do it. But in whatever way that you connect with them, you want to let them know, hey, we are coming back. We're coming back here. Go ahead, plan, put a date on the calendar, circle it. Go ahead and record those episodes during your time between seasons. And that way they can be ready for launch. Maybe almost do a mini relaunch, have cheerleaders shout you out. Oh, she's back with episode 2. I'm so excited, that kind of thing. Have special graphics for season 2 that you're going to share, that you're going to give people to share. Make it an event, right? And during that time off, maybe give them some value. Maybe write a couple blog posts, maybe send a couple newsletters that have to do with your podcast. Keep them in the loop. Keep them excited about the information that you're sharing. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I drop off the face of the planet and now I'm trying to relaunch my podcast. It doesn't need to be that at all. So that is the plan. I am going to be taking a break. Like I said, probably at the end of October, beginning of November, we will wrap up season 1 of the Caroline Creates podcast. This has been really fun. Having a solo project is definitely very interesting, having gone into the podcast world with a co-host. But I've really enjoyed it. And yeah, so I've got a couple of things going on that I thought I would just announce and kind of talk about. One is my free e-course, Find Your Confidence, A Voice as a Podcaster, is actually going to become a paid course. So this is actually the last week that you will be able to get that course for free. So if you're thinking about it, go ahead and jump in. I am going to be releasing a new course called the Mini Podcast Launch Guide. So one of the big services that I offer is a launch guide, and I help people get their podcast launched. And this course is taking all of that, putting it into a course so you can DIY it yourself, because I know not everybody can hire somebody to help them launch their podcast. So I wanted an avenue for that. So that will be coming out really soon. Look for that. And along with that, I'm going to be creating a free challenge. So be on the lookout for that. I'm super excited to be back after my little break, and I am excited to chat with you next week. Before you go, please head to Apple Podcasts and leave me a review. I would love to hear from you. And to learn more about me and follow along my journey, head to www.carolinecreates.com. There you can also listen to episodes, watch YouTube videos, and find out more about my podcasting services. Thanks so much. Have a great day.